Welcome to the fish tank.
Hey everybody, Fishman here, and welcome to another video. My apologies to my regular viewers who tune in for fish-related builds. This isn't going to be one of those, but it does lead into Friday's video, and you'll understand as we go along. Currently what I'm setting up here for is I need to make a hard stop on the aluminum saw sled I made so that I can do repetitive cuts. If you remember, I built that because I wanted to be able to clamp down and make tiny little pieces, and so I don't have to throw it all the offcuts. So I took a piece of brass bar stock here. I just machined out a groove. It fits nicely on there, and then I'm going to do is on the back arm you see I will drill and tap two screw holes, and that will just be a nice way I can easily measure where I want it to go, and I can just run off a bunch of pieces at the same size. Now this is kind of interesting video in the sense that it kind of it's the pros and cons of DIY. That's what I like to think of it as. The problem I find with DIY is, I mean, it works great. You can build stuff and it's kind of cool, but it gets to the point where you build something and you like it and you just don't want to go back to the old way of doing things. So I built this saw sled. I only built it for small pieces. I mean, this is all it's for. It's designed perfectly fine for cutting up little pieces. But I tried putting in a 12-inch piece of acrylic into that, and it just simply doesn't have the reach for it. It's just beyond its comfortable travel distance to give me an accurate cut. So I thought what I would do is, I'll just make another one. Aluminum's not cheap. Those I got as offcuts, and it was just kind of a one-of kind of thing, and it was kind of cool. But if I were to make that out of aluminum again, it would be very expensive. So I decided, well, I'll make a wooden one, and this is what this is all about here. First off, when I started setting this up, I wanted it to be simple, so I had to true up my saw blade as much as possible because it's easier to do it that way. I mean, the other one with the aluminum saw sled, I could make very, very tiny incremental adjustments over on the milling machine, and it wasn't necessary. But now it is essential that this is as square as possible to start off with, so that I don't have to do anything fancy later on. So I got a nice piece of wood. This is a 3/4 inch hardwood plywood. And the reason why those two pieces that you see, which are going to be the rails, are a little bit short, is I didn't really want to spend any money on this. So these are just the two pieces that I cut off the end to make this, the right shape and size that I wanted. So the funny thing about this is, this leads into Friday's video in the sense that Brian, who won the Patreon draw for December, he had a request. It wasn't a difficult build to do, but like I said, my current saw sled doesn't quite have the reach I need. So that's what kind of led me to thinking I need this. And the reason for that is that I want to make the top of the item, I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet, but I wanted it to be a single solid piece. And like I said, I couldn't trim the piece. It's going to be made out of acrylic on my old saw sled without having the risk of ending up with a slight difference in size. Like, it's not perfectly square, and I just didn't want to do that and send it out. So that's why I'm building this. Well, not just that. Like I said, the dangers of DIY is once you've made something and you like it. You can see the rail there on the right. That is my old measuring system for putting the old rail on, and I would put the fence there, and that would be how I would set up and cut acrylic. It is not it's not very accurate, so I have to be careful. And every now and then, if I'm doing lots of things and I don't take the extra time to double check, I'll end up cutting something and it won't end up being square, and that unfortunately ends up with waste of material and that sort of stuff, and it's not something that I like to do. So this is the reason why I end up doing this. is going to be really useful, and I think it's going to be really interesting as far as the build goes. But it's simply it's just me being pickier, I think, than I really need to be. So anyway, all that said, what I'm doing here is I'm just going to attach these two. These are the fence. These are the handrails and the back support, and it's just a simple matter of measuring, drilling, countersinking, and setting screws with glue in it, just to make sure that they are nice and square. And that was probably the trickiest part of this. But in comparison, to get to this stage here on the aluminum one I made, it was about 2 weeks worth of work. And this was about maybe 2 hours worth of work, 2.5 hours, 3 hours maybe. But like I said, it's a lot simpler to deal with wood. Now I was thinking initially what I would do is make two rails out of hardwood. And then I saw that hardwood's really expensive. And I had enough of the railing left over from the aluminum build for the other saw sled that I would just make two. The aluminum rail. These are really nice pieces of aluminum. They're 3/4 inch, and they're also the harder. As far as aluminum goes, they're harder. This is support structure grade aluminum, so it's stuff I make racks out of and stuff. So it is tougher than the regular aluminum, but it's also a lot harder, obviously, than wood. So I figured they would last quite a while, and it's just like I said, this is very easy to set up on the milling machine and just drill through. And that's what I'm doing right now, is countersinking, and these will be the two guides for the whole sled part. And these will raise up the saw sled off of the saw sufficiently that there's enough of an air gap underneath there that the friction should be really low. It should actually run really smoothly, and it should also actually hopefully be really square. But I have a couple tricks I want to do, which will probably ensure that it is running as square as I need it to be. So there's one. I'm going to drill a bunch more, and these are going to drill in. Like, if you turn this up, this would be like where the saw will go into the saw bed. So there's about another 1/8 of an inch of wood there. And then these are going to run in here, and they're nice and smooth. They run the full length, as you can see. They're 2 feet long. Probably longer than I need, but I don't want to make another one of these. So these are nice and smooth. I had to sand them down a bit, of course, just because it was a bit too much of a friction fit. But once they're sanded down and set up properly, it's all set to go. You're going to see my table saw rocking here. That's because I had to pull it out to do the work around it. Normally where it sits, so where I do all my work, the wheels are set up for that, but I wasn't going to try and move it in there to film, move it back out, so I just left it in this one position where the floor isn't quite as even. And anyway, it's no big deal. So I was just testing there to make sure, first off, that the pieces were glued and screwed into it so it was nice and square. But I wanted to make sure I had the squarest one on where my hand is currently. And you can see it moves really nice and smoothly. Now what I decided to do for this is silicone adheres quite well to sanded aluminum, but I can remove it. And the same for wood. I mean, I can get this off if I need to. So my plan was, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to glue this in, let it set overnight, and then it will be reasonably set enough that I can actually move this around as long as I'm gentle with it, that I can see if it's going to be square. And that's the important thing. I'm going to put this down, I'm going to wiggle it around, then I'm going to position it, because I have to decide where I want, how much sled I want on one side of the blade and versus the other and all that sort of stuff. And then I need to go through, not really a tedious process, but I have to be very accurate at this stage to make sure that it is square. So I at the beginning, you'll notice I had trued up the blade to the railings. So the front of the saw and the blade's trajectory are perpendicular to each other. So all I had to do was stick these parallels in, line it all up nice and even, make sure it's all square, and then just put some weight on top of the wood and just hold it down. It was excellent. It was really quite easy to do. It wasn't hard, and I took my time just to make sure it was square, because if it isn't, I'll have to knock those railings off and do it all over again. So, I mean, it was something I wanted to take my time with. But the nice thing about this is, the nice thing about saw sleds in general, is once they are, like, when I go to cut acrylic, sometimes I have to peel off the protective coating. And because the acrylic is going to sit on this and move with it, it doesn't get scratched, which is really cool. So that means it allows me to do the extra bit of work I need to do for Brian's project, which is, like I said, on Friday you'll get to see why I'm doing all this. And my apologies again, but it's things you have to do, well, when you like to do lots of your own work, I guess. There you go. It's glued. I have to be gentle now, keep in mind. So I just want to make sure it slides evenly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up the saw blade just so it nicks the underside of this. Just so I can score it. Because, like I said, if this doesn't work out, if it's not square enough to my satisfaction at this point, I have to knock those rails off and do it all over again. And I certainly don't want to end up cutting all the way through. And of course, if I did that, it's done deal. Because I would like the gap on either side of this to be as narrow as possible for the blade. So I don't want much in the way of, like, I don't want any gap there so that I end up with pieces falling down, that sort of stuff. So there's a score. It turned out to be perfectly square, so I was fine with that. I didn't bother showing it to you because I was doing it one-handed. It was kind of hard to do that and film at the same time, so I just left that part out. Now, normally I like to do these kinds of screw holes by hand, but I made sure I was extra careful, because if I put it in inaccurately, if I put in the screw just slightly off perpendicular, I can end up moving that from side to side. And I didn't want to do that because it would end up messing up the trueness. So here we are. I'm going to turn the blade on, move up the blade a little bit more, and cut it again and make sure it follows the same path. And then it's a simple matter of, if everything's good, I've only put in 4 screws out of the 8. So if it turns out that it's, not quite square, I can always do it again. And this is the neatest part about this. It's so simple to actually cut the hole. This is the hardest part of making it out of metal. I had to make sure that everything was perfectly square. I mean, like to the less than 1/100th of an inch before I even got to this point, because I can't cut through the aluminum with the table saw. Well, technically you can, but it would just be it would be a lot of work for the blade to do that, and it would not be easy. So here it is. There's the square to the back of the fence, and I did one cut here. But the neat thing about this sort of thing is you can make, I mean, this is fine for me. I mean, this is good enough, but I wanted to make sure it was good before I put all the rest of the screws in. So there's a little trick you can do. I mean, it's all over YouTube if you want to do it. You take a piece of wood, you cut it, and then you turn it 90 degrees, you cut it, turn it 90 degrees, you cut it. And what you end up doing is you compound any kind of error you have. So you cut that, move the piece you don't care about, turn it 90 degrees, do the same. If that's out of square, the next time you cut, you're adding to it. And then I'm going to do this 3 times. I think they say they should do it 5 times. But after I'd done the 3rd cut, I looked at the piece, and it was like, well, wait a minute. I'm just shaving off a teeny little amount, so it's easier to spot a difference. It was looking really good, so all I did was I took it and put the square up against it. I mean, 3 was enough. Especially for what I'm trying to do here. You can be as accurate as you want, but for me, this is perfectly fine. So I'm going to show you one last clip here of, that's the cut, and I'll show you the little piece I cut off. Anyway, it worked out great, and I'll be using this for Friday's video. So thank you very much for watching. If you like this style of video, please like and or subscribe. And I promise I'll be back to the fish stuff on Friday. So thanks again for watching. I will see you in the next video, and bye for now.